This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello everyone and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast on the We Made This podcast network. My name is Kurt North and I am here to discuss Red Dwarf with you on Red Dwarf episode 2 of series 5. I can't speak anymore. And joining me as always is Mark Adams as my co-host. How are we doing, Mark?
Hello, I'm all right, yeah. I'm quite excited about this one because it's a favourite episode.
It's a favourite episode. Nice. And also Carl Bryan. Carl, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much, Kurt. And yourself?
Good. Second week into Series 5, boys. First one was a bit of surprising to me. I know we were talking about this last week, about the change in order and things, but we're into Inquisitor now. It's very sci-fi epic kind of mode, isn't it? It's very kind of like... Terminator-esque in some ways. So, Mark, what are your general first impressions of this episode?
I think you're right that it's very kind of sci-fi epic, but it's definitely a tongue-in-cheek piss take of the sci-fi epic. And I'm all about it because as a kid, I loved sci-fi epics. I still love sci-fi epics. And yeah, this is just a favourite episode of mine. There's so much to like about this episode.
What about you, Carl? What do you think?
I love how it's a very self-contained story, and it's in the previous episode as we're talking about how there was a lot taken out that we could have had put back in to make for a longer one. This is kind of almost just the perfect mini film almost in what's going on in the episode with the Inquisitor there. But it is good. It's more dramatic than I remember, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things I alluded to last week was they changed the order because they thought that this might get a bit confusing. I think Chris Barry has said also as well that it's taken him a few watches to go, right, okay, that's what that is. I don't personally have a problem with that, but I am very much a person who loves the concept of certain films. Inception, Tenet, for example, the 2 Nolan films, is a perfect example of that. Terminator 2, obviously, is what it is.
I suppose you're right, because wibbly wobbly timey wimey is something that modern audiences are very, very familiar with. I'd say as soon as the term wibbly wobbly timey wimey became a term, which was David Tennant's Doctor Who, the idea of time travel and the consequences and making sure that you do everything in the way that you remember it was much more mainstream. And I guess I look at this with 2021 vision, but you're right, it is quite a strong sci-fi sort of wibbly wobbly timey wimey kind of episode, which had only really been very mainstream in perhaps the Terminator up until this point, because it is only 92.
I think as well, it's really interesting when people see certain films or whatever. I would say Shutter Island is a perfect example that I can think of. There's an allusion to a twist. There is a twist, but then at the very, very end, there's a moment, and it's like, oh right, okay, that's great. That's something to debate long after the film's finished. And obviously, Mark, we won't mention what that is, but
I think the spoiler ship has sailed, mate. If I haven't seen that film, what is it? Nearly 10 years old now?
Yeah, it was 2009.
Yeah, so if I haven't seen it, that's my fault. You can spoil it, Right,
so there's the mindset of Leonardo DiCaprio's mindset is that does he want to die a hero or live as a monster, basically, because it's been psychologically harmed over the course of his wife's death, and ironically, it's very much like Inception. But and he basically could get lobotomized at the end of the film, and is going. He goes to get lobotomized at the end, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a detective that comes to the island to investigate a missing person. However, it turns out the whole thing is a giant role play,
psychological role play to try
treatment to try and get him to come to terms with the fact that he killed his wife. And he eventually does break through, but the next day, they basically, if it doesn't stick, because they've said that they've broken through to him before, and if it doesn't stick, they're going to lobotomize him this time. And the next day when they speak to him, he basically goes back to how it was and is like, oh, it's not worked. We're going to have to lobotomize him. But he then hints that he's just telling them what he wants them to hear to get lobotomized, so he doesn't have to live with the memory of what he's done anymore.
Right, okay. There's some Black Mirror episodes that are a bit like that as well, aren't there?
Yeah. So it's so it has that moment, but a lot of people just took it as like, he's forgotten. But it's like there's a, like, you can't take it both ways, but people just didn't even register. And I think the audiences will kind of like look at stuff like that and either see it just as what it is, because they're not looking for that sci-fi or that deeper meaning, or you get, and when you bring timey-wimey stuff into it, it becomes a bit like, I don't know where I'm at now. I'm confused. I don't want to know. So I can see why they put that episode in. So,
all right. Okay. I hadn't seen Terminator when I saw The Inquisitor, and I was either an intelligent young man or this just didn't bother me and it was still a fun episode, because it's been a favorite since I was a kid.
I'm not saying it wasn't a favorite. What I'm saying is that the reason why they put Hollership ahead of this episode, for a general audience, that's the debate that they're having.
Are they saying the general audience is thick?
I think they would be saying that they would probably be easier to get into the show if you're watching that character-based episode than an Inquisitor
because
episode.
In this one, we've got different versions of characters and characters getting killed and then brought back and things like that. And if you are just dropping into the series, like we've said before, a lot of us dropped in around about series 3 and 4. If you dropped in on series 5 and the first thing you see is half of the characters get wiped out and then they're replaced with other ones, and then by the end of it, the original ones are back, but you're not really quite sure what's happened there, it might put you off seeing the next one.
That does make a lot of sense, actually. Good point. All right.
Carl can always give us the information in a way we can make it understand. Me and Mark just go, blah, 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 blah.
I occasionally sound vaguely intelligent when I try very hard. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I occasionally
whine about gay shit. I'm multifaceted.
Okay. Anyway, moving on. Red Dwarf episode, Series 5, Episode 2, The Inquisitor, directed by Juliet May and Grant Naylor, which we discussed last week, and written by Rod Grant and Doug Naylor. This sees a simulant going to the end of time and then basically redoing time by using a time machine to take people out who are not worthy. It opens with some great Doctor Who effects, I think, with the skeleton shooting, very Dalek-y.
Yeah.
And the Inquisitor comes in and basically says that you haven't lived a worthy life and someone else needs to take over. And something that we talked about last week, which is kept in my mind, is that the way that the Red Dwarf credits are. And the one thing I wrote about this was that you could imagine this being a cold open, then going into the credits, then going into the main show. And it doesn't do that. But it was considered. It was actually considered to change the makeup of the way that the Red Dwarf is, which I thought was intriguing.
Weren't as fashionable then, though. And they've become almost the standard or the norm these days. But a cold open was generally done as something really, really highlight this, really special. Like the only cold open for a Doctor Who episode in the 80s, there was actually two. There was when Colin Baker regenerated into Sylvester McCoy, huge moment. And there was also when Colin Baker's Doctor was pulled into Gallifrey for the trial of the Time Lord, which was essentially the trial of the show itself. Two huge, huge moments. And this cold open would have made sense, but it's not a huge, huge moment for the show. It's not a show-changing, oh, shit moment, however appropriate it might have been for a cold open. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It feels like it would have been a little bit long for a cold open as well.
Right, yeah.
It's cold opens do tend to be quite punchy. I mean, maybe with a short, if they knew it was definitely going to be a cold open, they probably would have rewritten it to make it a bit more dun dun dun. But it definitely would have worked as a cold open, certainly.
I mean, I was looking at it from like we've said, from 2021 vision, looking at it from our view here. But then when reading back some of the backstory, it was considered. So the fact it was actually considered to be, potentially put in that way is interesting in itself, because it is a cold open in the way that it's related to the story, but it's not a continuation. It's explaining something at the very beginning, and then you move into the main characters, aren't you? So, and X-Files is only a year away at this point, and as well, and obviously they do cold opens, and I think a lot of shows would have done them.
This series would have been there's a lot of good stuff you could have used as cold opens almost, but it may have come at the, think of the word now, not benefit, the opposite of benefit, detriment of the script.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to do Angels and Demons, you could have the fact that Crichton and Lister blow up Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
Accidentally. That would have made a great cold open, but you'd have lost a whole pile of stuff about the Triplicator, and you would have been about 5-6 minutes into the episode before you'd have hit the credits.
Yeah.
Which nowadays you can, especially with American shows, you can do. But I think with what we're dealing with here, with it being a 25-30 minute episode, cold opens literally would need to be a minute and a half.
I mean, I suppose they're looking at it from a sci-fi, Star Trek has cold opens, Star Trek Next Generation does, so I could probably see why they thought about it just for this particular one, because of the way they wrote it.
Do any of the Dave ones have cold opens? Because I don't remember any cold opens in Red Dwarf ever.
I don't think so. No,
they don't.
No. They do a weird thing, which we won't let you know about, but they do a weird thing with the endings in season 11 and 12, but they don't change the format at all. So anyway, let's move on then. So we come out of the kind of the history of the idea of the Inquisitor and him deleting people at a time. I mean, what a tash that guy's got, by the way. The replacement.
Full on Ian Rush level.
And the hair's like, that isn't going anywhere, that hair, is it?
Full on Ian Rush level. In fact, the guy looks like Ian Rush, let's be blunt.
If somebody turned up and said, you're being erased from existence and this guy is taking your place, you'd look and go, fair enough.
Yeah. They've literally done that, haven't they, though?
Me, I'd have gone, milk? Ugh. Sorry, these references. These references.
Didn't he have tissues on the side of his bed as well?
Yeah.
So I thought that was brilliant. That there's all these little moments that they've picked a particular actor to be in the bed, and then you've got the specimen that's going to take over, which highlights what this is about. But when we do come to see our heroes, we've got the comic book version of Troy. So, which the scene itself is rather interesting, and I quite enjoyed it.
I mean, we're not far off that kind of thing now. You can get comic book versions of historical events.
You can get comic book Shakespeare, mate. Comic book Shakespeare's great. They use the original Shakespeare text and they just put the whole play into a comic book, and they're brilliant, and they're incredibly helpful to engage with young people. Oh, Christ on a bike. I will get off my former librarian's soapbox.
You never really stop being a librarian.
No, I think I'm going to be a librarian for the rest of my life. Lister, right? He is right about that fucking Trojan horse. I completely agree with it. Shouldn't be. Don't trust Greeks bearing gifts because that's racist. And Trojans are a bit dumb, I think but again, that's probably racist as well. Are there any Trojans left? Have I just been racist to Trojans?
There's probably descendants of the Trojans, certainly.
But do people identify as I am a Trojan? Like I might say I am British, or
probably a lot of big beefy men in gyms.
I am Trojan.
Yeah. But his analysis of that, it's bang on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's this and the Eddie Izzard routine about the Trojan horse, where they're just leaving like, oh, we're giving up now. Bye. We're leaving a giant horse as usual. It's bizarre that it's classed as like one of the greatest military moves of all history when it does rely a lot on the stupidity of the other people.
But it's also a nice progression that he does actually look at comics and he does read comics. He doesn't read a book, but he does, at least read comics, which was nice to say. So.
He's learning about history in the medium that suits him best.
Yeah. And I've done that before. No, I mean, Wikipedia wasn't born then, was it? So, a lot of people get their information from Wikipedia, even though most of the time it's wrong, including stuff on Red Dwarf. But
good grief.
Oh, there will be inaccuracies on it, I think I would have thought.
Well, the writing of the comic book, the dialogue sounds like it needs a bit of work.
Yeah, it does. There's too many kablams in my estimation, to be honest with you.
Guinea kapow is still one of my favourite noises.
So we get our first introduction to Inquisitor via for the Red Dwarf crew via some amazing mouth work from our good friend Craig Charles. It's something to behold, isn't it? And the fact that he talks through Lister in this way, it's quite strange because I'm not quite sure personally why they went that way. But what do you think to it?
I would have thought it would have made more sense for it to come through Crichton, mechanoid to mechanoid, because I'd forgotten that the Inquisitor was a simulant. I just thought he was some kind of omnipotent god kind of figure. But they do emphasize that he's a simulant. I'd just forgotten that element of it. So in my head, now that I know that he's a simulant, surely it would have been more sense for him to kind of hijack the machine rather than the person.
I thought that, but I think, it could come down to who can pull the funniest I'm being possessed face.
You're not wrong.
Also, there's the horror of it that to kind of give that preemptive, this guy is powerful in that he can take control of Lister, who is, for lack of a better, probably the strongest minded one out of all of them because he's not a mechanoid, a projection, or the cat. That he can just take over him like that.
Well, he's the most valuable in a weird way because obviously anybody can be a hologram. Mechanoids aren't, people. Let's not get into that debate, but they are a different kind of organism, different kind of entity. The cat, we know that there are cats elsewhere because they left Red Dwarf. They believe that Dave Lister is the last human. And so he's much more valuable to the universe than the other three in a weird way. So when he's in jeopardy, I think that's kind of the idea, is that they make it more scary when it's Lister that's in jeopardy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's more agency to it because it's like, the actual entire, as you say, human race is at stake at that point. Whereas if it's Crichton, it's just, as you say, it's just more of a slightly different thing because there is mechanoids around. So,
and this kind of feels like, obviously they've been in situations before where they might die, but this one feels more abruptly like they're in mortal danger because somebody's coming for them on their own ship rather than they've happened to stumble across something.
Yeah, like the Justice Field or something.
A lot of it is they caused the shit for themselves, whereas this guy has just invaded them.
Yeah, which brings up to the next point, actually, which in the next part of the episode is the Crichton does talk about the Inquisitor, the dark fable, and he starts going into this like campfire story mode, which is probably the best way to put it. It's like, and it's a dark fable. It's going to be doing this and doing that, and there's no God and no afterlife, and he got to the end of existence and doing all this thing. But in itself, the actual idea that the Inquisitor has lived to the end of days, realizes no afterlife, realizes no God, which again is a reoccurring thing that happens in Red Dwarf, and then has to build a time machine and then goes kind of so thing that he basically gives up on life because people need to live that worthwhile life is in itself. I mean, we've talked about Doctor Who a few times. It's like a Doctor Who kind of story, isn't it? It's that something at the end of time, and they're coming back through time and making course corrections. So it's
the first immortal that we encounter in Red Dwarf, I think. They've never looked at immortality ever, I don't think, up until this point. And it's quite subtly done. But when you think about it, this character has lived through those 3 million years when Lister was in stasis. He is insanely immortal.
I mean, if you think about it, so just from a science point of view, that the universe, from what we know, 13.6, 14 billion years old, that it's probably lasts as long as that. So we're talking 30 to 40 billion years before the end of time. And, he's lived through just the 3 million. It's nothing. Yeah. So he's managed to live through like another, say, argument's sake, 40 billion years. And, and there would be an element of like the way he's feeling right now. So as you say, it's something rather unique to the story of Red Dwarf that they actually haven't touched upon this before.
But that level of power and immortality and omnipotence is quite a frequent thing in at least modern Doctor Who, but also classic Doctor Who as well. And this is the first time we've seen it in Red Dwarf, and they don't over-egg it, but when you take a step back and think about it, it's heavy shit.
I mean, if you look at it, Carl, from like the Terminator point of view as well, that there is that element to it, but at the same time, it's really focused on that sci-fi element, isn't it? Really,
it's almost sad in a way because you talk about it. He's gone all the way through eternity and he's realized there's no God, no afterlife, which means that
took him a while.
Oh, Mark.
I was about 14 when I realised.
But it does make you realise that this simulant may have thought it's not a simulant silicon heaven thing. He thought that there was God.
Yeah.
And he thought there was an afterlife. And now he's gone all the way through. He's just crushed. And like Mark said, it ties in very closely with modern Doctor Who, the character of Me, played by what's her name? Who from Game of Thrones, who basically is made immortal.
Yeah,
and it shows in a very it's like a passing of time, and it's just this one shot of her face, and she goes from like the wonder and excitement of enjoying all of time and space around her to being bitter and angry by the end of it. It was the phrase madness is repetition and getting no result. And this is essentially what the Inquisitor's been doing. He's been doing the same thing for all eternity. And he's got to the end of it all and there's nothing. If we worked until the end of eternity and then found out like, there's no point to any of it, I'd flip.
So let's turn this on its head then, because when he gets there and he basically realizes there's no God, there's no afterlife, it's just living forever. He decides to build this time machine, and then he sets his own course of like looking at himself and saying, have I lived a worthwhile life? And he then kind of projects that onto other people, to asking them, have they lived their worthwhile life? And that is very Red Dwarf. The fact that they're looking at, the fact that who's been a space bum, like Crichton basically rhymes off all that stuff to Rimmer, doesn't he? So it's like, and it's not necessarily saying you have to be the next, the best leader in the world or whatever. It's just living a life that you see as fulfilling. Yeah. And that in itself is very Red Dwarf.
I think the concept is savage, but also quite subtle. And the idea that the ultimate judge of you is so true. I treat other people with so much more leniency than I do for myself. I would never, ever expect other people to hit anywhere near the standards that I hold myself up to. And here's one for you. Do you think the Inquisitor would let you live if it was you, assessing you?
Yeah. Put simply.
I don't.
No.
You don't think so, Carl?
No.
I don't think so either. I think he'd acknowledge that a lot of what I'd done was good. But, last night I sat and binge watched 4 episodes of The Circle when I could have been doing something a bit more worthwhile.
Yeah, but I think if you think about stuff that you may have done or things that may have happened in your life and whether or not you've been a good element of that yes, there has been good things. There's been very bad things in my life. There's been great things in my life. But when I look at like only 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a van had turned over in front of me and I had to go and help them on the motorway because it like turned and spun over. I've saved somebody's life doing CPR and whatever and stuff like that, that those moments made me feel good about myself and the fact that it has and I've actually passed and I don't often feel this, but sometimes somebody will say something to you and it's like, oh, actually, I've never realized that before. So I'll use an example of there's a girl at work, two girls at work, one of which is a lot more confident and has a lot more experience than I have. Who's from a jokey side of point of view, as I've always said, just do the thing and apologize later because it's easier to make an apology than it is to actually get the thing authorized. But also the other girl who always taken something to heart with me that I've said, look, things are going to go wrong. If you're planning something, always think about that 3 things are going to go wrong in that say wedding show or whatever it may well be, because 3 things will go wrong. That way, when the first thing goes wrong, you're not panicking. When the second thing goes wrong, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And generally, you won't necessarily get to the third. But if she was in the mode of like, as soon as the first thing goes wrong, that's it. And it's a different mindset. So just passing on little coaching tips like that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but then you hear like 3 years later saying, you said that to me once and I found it really helpful is passing on that worthwhileness, really.
Absolutely. That's a very humanist outlook on life. And I have a very humanist outlook on life, but unfortunately, I'm not a very successful humanist when it comes to acknowledging myself. I'm very good at the kind of empathy element of humanism, but I can't cut myself any slack ever. And I don't know why I've always been like that. And I acknowledge that I've done stuff like that. I've inspired people. I've made a difference in so many ways. But like the example I just gave you, I spent an evening watching The Circle rather than an evening writing to my MP about problems in other countries where gay people are being oppressed. Anything that isn't something worthwhile, I think me as the Inquisitor would fail me.
Everyone goes up and down, and I think I've had some really, really big lows. And if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said no. But I think I've come to accept certain things about myself, and in that time. So there's the thing, and I'm naturally a laid back person anyway. So by asking that question, it's like, right, where have I actually helped? Where have I done that? And it comes from a coaching, as you say, empathy or coaching background that, I would think as a coach, what have I done?
But isn't that the fundamental unfairness of the Inquisitor? It depends what time he sees you in your life. It depends on whether or not you're a person like me who holds yourself to stupid ass levels of achievement and yeah, I really like this. And as a kid, it was just a scary robot guy who basically was the source of a lot of laughs of characters meeting themselves. But as an adult, fuck, this is really heavy shit, actually. And
so if you look at it from
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, so if you look at it from a point of view, I'll ask Carl this because he's been a bit quiet. So what Rimmer says, oh, why didn't someone tell me? If I needed to live a worthwhile life, then I would have done something about it. If you'd known from day one that the Inquisitor was coming after you in 40 years, 35, 40 years, would that have changed you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anybody, if someone said, you're going to hit 35 and then you're going to get judged on how well you've behaved in life, everyone would be, I mean, it's almost not a bad thing because everyone would be, right, I am working to the best of my potential. It's not fair that it would take place, but it certainly would be something that would motivate people to live a worthwhile life, but it all varies on what that person deems as worthwhile. If it's get as much money as humanly possible over 35 years, they think that's worthwhile. Then by the time that judgment comes, it may not be what they were looking for.
Yeah.
It's, it's like one giant job interview, but it happens to be life.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they sort of go like, no, you don't qualify for this position. And then you get replaced by someone who does, or someone who could.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was wondering whether or not the replacements get a visit from the Inquisitor, because you could end up with one guy's entire sack is full of useless people.
I have issues with that in general, but I'll talk about that towards the back end of the episode.
What, other men's sacks or
no,
what?
no, not other men's sacks, not other men's sacks. That's going to be the recurring joke, isn't it? No, it's just about the actual removing people from time, but I'll talk about that later. So yeah, so in itself, but Red Dwarf does do this. You've got the justice stuff that we've had before. It does keep coming back to this. You're the judge of your own person, which is really interesting the way that they think about that in Red Dwarf. They do feel like there has to be this, what do you perceive yourself to be? It's always inward looking. I really enjoy Red Dwarf for that. And it's something I wouldn't have picked up before this podcast, really.
This whole series is very introspective in each episode. So you've got Hollership, you've got Rimmer, trying to get the thing he's always wanted. In this one, we've got everyone trying to prove that they're, worthwhile existence. Terraform, you've got Rimmer confronting his own neuroses. Quarantine, you've got the dark side of Rimmer coming out. Demons and Angels, we've got everyone meeting their good and light sides. And then back to reality, it's facing whether everything they've done was actually real or not, and what are they if it isn't real. It's I know I've seen in interviews where like, this is the series where everyone was looking at the big book of myths, but it's very kind of it's a very sort of introspective thing for the characters, looking inside at what makes them what they are, emotionally putting them through the ringer for the whole series.
And that wouldn't have worked at any other point. They've had 4 series of establishments of characters that we've grown to know and love. Whereas if you'd have done this in series 2, for example, it would have just not worked. So there's a confidence there that they can do this to the characters.
Yeah.
You've been in like 2 and 3, you kind of ease into it a little bit with like things like Thanks for the Memory. And It's Better Than Life, where just that little thing of, Rimmer's mind works against him. Lister tries to do good, but sometimes completely balls it up and things like that. But it's now we've hit this series, and I can imagine with the fact that they were like, right, we need to, I think in this series, one of the big things is we need to bring in more people, or at least more people for them to interact with, whether they're playing them themselves or that. And this seems like the easiest way to go to avoid my parcel's about to turn up because I've just got an email saying it's here. They're still trying to avoid aliens or monsters of the week and things like that. So what's the most terrifying thing you can think of to deal with apart from a giant simulant is yourself.
I'd argue that the Inquisitor is definitely a monster of the week, though.
Yeah. It would have been interesting because they don't really do recurring characters, do they? It's in 6. I think it's 6 when the simulants that they run into come back from Gunmen of the Apocalypse. Yeah. And they meet the female one a couple of episodes later. they're probably the only recurring ones I can think of. But the Inquisitor would have been an interesting one to bring him back in the same way they brought back like the polymorph.
Yeah, absolutely. With that in mind, then, if you look at them looking at reflections of themselves, we've got Rimmer. And his kind of what we were saying, Mark, and what you were saying actually, but the fact that he's saying, looking at himself and saying, well, how can I have potentially done that in a different way? Because you're saying about what pressures you put yourself under, but he's going from a point of view of, well, what else could I have been? It's nature versus nurture, isn't it? Really, that's what it's asking the question of. And for Rimmer, it's really quite kind of deep. For Kat, maybe not so much, which is one of the best lines in Red Dwarf. But we'll get to that in a second. So what about Rimmer's kind of like going back to this well of nature versus nurture, Carl? What do you think to that?
I kind of feel with this, if Rimmer hadn't basically just broke down and admitted what he is, he may not have been saved. Because he's such a kind of Weasley. He only had a small area of room for success, considering his background, and it kind of shows that the Inquisitor is fair to a point, that he realizes that Rimmer's done well considering what he came from, and then what we learn about him in future series, which Mark won't know yet, but he's done exceptionally well for what he's doing.
Yeah.
I think you compare this to Justice, where Rimmer's personality was to his detriment and his danger in Justice, but it's actually to his advantage here in a different situation. But it's kind of similar to Justice in as much as justify your existence. So this is... I didn't think about it until exactly that moment when you inspired me, Carl, but this is quite similar to Justice when you think about it.
I think that overall, because sometimes I'll get episodes mixed up, and it's for that reason that I can justify yourself. It's like, well, I thought that was Justice, but so it's like there's certain things in my head, and it's the same with that Wax World episode, and Rimmer World and all those. There's definitely tropes that Red Dwarf keep going back to in different eras of the show, which can get a little bit muddled in your head. All done very differently. But what I like about, especially what we've said off air, that the way that this episode seems to be is, when you look above the comedy level and go down to the kind of the depths of what they're talking about, there's different variations on the theme, which I like that we can talk about those in separate ways. I mean, you look at Kat. Kat has got a beautiful ass at the end of the day.
He has brought pleasure to the world because he has such a beautiful ass. And
really?
That's whole. So all four of these, I think, again, it goes back to the confidence of knowing what the characters are and who they're writing for and what characters they're writing. They are so accurate and perfect for each character. Rimmer's is really sad, and the general story of Rimmer is you feel sorry for him despite the fact he's a shithead. Kat's is incredibly shallow but funny, and everybody's got a shallow and funny friend. And Crichton's is as always, when it comes to something that focuses on Crichton, it's a really interesting science fiction discussion. And Lister's is the one that most people will identify with. It's just so fucking well done.
It's on FM, so it's not on DAB though. No. That's the thing.
Buddy.
I kind of like the serious Inquisitor Cat.
Yeah,
the attitude's still there, but it's a very serious cat.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and the fact that he only really breaks into the sort of the cat that we know and love.
That's your argument.
He's almost taken aback at what he's like.
Is that your case? You need more? That whole
just
scene
the backwards and forwards
could be quotable Red Dwarf, because I will say all of the things that both versions of the cat say in that all the time. I think this episode, that just start to finish, assume it's quotable Red Dwarf for me, because it's an top 5 favorite, and that scene is my favorite scene in the whole thing.
I think it says something about the versatility of Danny John Jules, that 2 of the best scenes in the whole series he has are with himself.
Yeah. Well, what about Crichton, Carl? Because Crichton, it has an element here of, I wonder why you do. You know, he pushes it back onto Inquisitor, which is really important.
It's interesting because I think, as much as Crichton's broken programming and he's learned how to lie and things like that, he can narrow it down to, I am a mechanoid. I'm not supposed to be judged for what I've done. I serve. And so I don't think it's like when they sort of said, this could be classed as being stubborn. I don't think he is. I think he's stubborn. I think he's just stating fact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. It's almost like, I don't know why I'm here, because this shouldn't apply. But that kind of shows in the previous ones where it seemed fair, harsh but fair to what the others are doing. With Crichton, it almost seems like that is showing the madness in the Inquisitor in a way, in that Crichton's made a point that he shouldn't really be there, because there's a lot of traffic going on outside.
Okay.
He shouldn't really be there because of what he is. He's programmed to live a certain way. So how can you judge something which has been predetermined in what he does, but the simulant is doing it?
Yeah.
Even though the simulant's not human either.
Yeah. Well, that's what he says at the end, because he says, it's not our place to judge them. I wonder why you do. I wonder why the Inquisitor does that. Why does the Inquisitor judge us?
You say that Crichton's argument is that he was predetermined. That's actually also Rimmer's argument.
In terms of his background,
that
it was. There's more freedom for him to move it, though. There's to switch it. You can turn your back. You can, as we found out in the last episode, when they've just cast off all of their neuroses and as things that could be blamed on their parents, and now they just believe in constant guilt-free sex. Now, so Rimmer could have done that in his life and just cast it all off and gone, that's not me, this is what I'm going to do. But he didn't. He stayed in the problems he's had with the neuroses caused by his family. Whereas Crichton, it's written into his very fibre that he has to serve. But again, excuse me, that he has to serve, and that he's not supposed to be doing anything else. So for the Inquisitor, should he judge him?
But is it not the Inquisitor? Like you said, it's not for him to judge him. Is it not the Inquisitor more of a reflection on the Inquisitor than it is with Crichton, though? Because it's the Inquisitor going that you've broke your program, I've broke my program, you should be better.
You should be more like me.
Yeah.
It is. It's and it's that judgmental thing of like, well, if I can do it, why can't you do it? And everybody's different. But he's got that thing in him that everybody should be living the most like me. It's like the people you get on YouTube who are like, okay, people, let's do aerobics. Look at me, I've got abs upon abs, and my arse is so tight it can crack a walnut in it, and you can be like this. You might not want to.
Yeah.
And because you don't, that doesn't mean you're a complete failure.
Yeah. Deep in it, I just thought it was like a space monster. What could turn into the characters and talk to them.
I didn't even know I could speak this eloquently.
Eloquently is a word I was looking for before and couldn't find it. But Lister, of course, has spin on it, and it with Lister's aspect and Lister's viewpoint is that he's capable, and you say you're right, Mark, with like the capability. So I use myself as an example that often when I was at school that they would say that, if you put your mind to it, you could get 9, 10, 11 A's, GCSEs, but I kind of lazed about and did what I needed to get the pass marks I got, where I was like, I don't want to be like studying all the time. I walked into one exam and it was an English language exam, an A-level, and there was 4 subjects, of which 2, one might appear, so a lot of them won't appear on the paper. I basically crammed it all in about 2 or 3 days before, and I was lucky, and that subject was one on the exam paper. So I was lucky to do that, and I got a pass mark, but not the one I should have got, because I just couldn't be bothered at the time to do anything. And that's what Lister is. This is like, spin on it. Why do I need to do anything? It's like, you've got the ability to do it, but you just don't get up there. So,
yeah, but it sort of shows Lister's almost his own worst enemy in that. And he does show so much potential in what we're doing, what he's doing. Sorry, in that even at the start of the episode, Lister's reading about the Virgil's Armistead, the comic book. And just things like that. It's like he's got the capacity to do all this stuff, but he's just got this attitude of, no.
I'm happy. I'm just content with my life.
And content in what I'm doing. I don't need to fulfill, everything. Me personally, that drives me bonkers, and it has done in my lifetime, in that there's been things I've missed out on, and there's been potential things that I've, and that's driven me really quite mad. I've not done them, or I've not fulfilled that potential in there. And that's why I think it kind of works to, everybody needs that a little bit, I think, anyway. And with Lister not only not having that, but being very anti that by telling the Inquisitor to spin on it, I think looking back now, you can see why he was picked to be deleted.
Yeah.
In that, rather than, I remember when I first watched it being surprised that it was Lister and Crichton that had been chosen to be deleted.
Yeah.
But watching it back now, it makes all the sense in the world.
I think that was the point, wasn't it? That prior to the conversations, in your head, you'd think that Rimmer and the cat wouldn't have achieved anything and therefore would get deleted. But if you actually listen to the conversations, it's exactly right. And it was always going to be exactly right. But that's not what you think going into it, because Rimmer's so wretched, because the cat's so shallow. But a shallow person is less difficult to impress, particularly if you're talking to yourself. So your preconceived ideas, when you think about it, you're actually a bit dopey.
I mean, and again, it plays to it, like you say, it plays to it, because the very next scene is when they get eliminated, and it's Crichton going, "Sir, hey, you've deleted Crichton, you've deleted Rimmer." Oh, sir, maybe not. Which I think, and then within that moment, which is one of my favourite lines of Crichton's ever, and it's so simple. It's like, how are we going to go? We got any tricks up your sleeve? No sleeves.
Such a shit British style joke, isn't it? It's quite Tommy Cooper, actually.
Yeah. It's just like, no tricks, no sleeves.
I like Lister's reaction of, just the dawning realization of, oh, right, okay, yeah.
And I'd like to also shout out in this scene, lovely head squish practical effects. I love me some practical effects. The CG isn't bad in this episode, actually. It's dated, but it's not critically embarrassingly dated. But the practical effects of the head squish, love me some practical effects.
And you talk about quotable. I mean, I think throughout these few minutes, that as I say, no sleeves, and they got the Enig section where he's getting his head squashed up, and just before that, he actually does say, it says, while I'm standing here, he hits me from behind like this. It's just like brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I do say we have to go like Crichton a lot. We have to go. Like that. So it's and it's not even part of the episode. It's not even like me thinking about the episode. It's like for some reason that is instilled in my brain.
Yeah, the music as well is a bit understated when eventually Crichton's face gets squished, and it's gone from that joke of I jump, he jumps me from behind like this, to the second where you realise Crichton's dead or future Crichton's dead, that the music turns dramatic, and it kind of plays into that thing of there are jokes and ha ha ha, but no one's safe. At the moment, it's sort of like no one's safe. Everyone's could feasibly get wiped out very, very quickly.
So we talk about the fact that we've got an alternative Crichton and an alternative Lister. This is where my science fiction brain sometimes kicks into gear, and I can see the alternative realities version of it, but it is a pure coincidence that everything in their lives have fallen in place exactly how the original Lister and the original Crichton was to get them to that point.
Oh shit! Yeah, that's a very good point that I'd never thought of before.
I would have preferred it if we didn't have the uncredited Crichton, because I could make more of an argument that Crichton didn't exist in that reality. But it frustrates me a little bit when I do it at Star Trek Deep Space Nine as well. I don't like the mirror universe, because the mirror universe is, apart from one episode, is all the same people that have ended up in all the same places in a different universe. And it's like, doesn't really work.
I hear what you're saying. I absolutely 100% hear what you're saying. Agree completely, but no, the mirror universe is great. The wimpy linguist in Enterprise being just this savage, vicious bitch. I love Mirror World linguist lady whose name I can't remember.
I actually don't mind that, to be honest. I don't mind her. Linda Park is the character, is the actress. I can't remember what she's. Sato, I think she's called, isn't she? Sato. I have to look.
I don't know. I'm not a big Star Trek. But
yeah, Hoshi Sato is the character you're thinking of.
Hoshi. That's it.
Yes, and Enterprise was, to be fair, Enterprise, Deep Space Nine I knew about. I don't mind the Enterprise one as much, but I still have problems with it. But anyway, moving back to Red Dwarf, I do have an issue with that. I also have an issue with just the general concept of all that, the way that you get deleted from time, you just get plopped in. Now, if that was the actual thing that you just plop it into the existing time frame, I could see it, but it just frustrates me a little bit. Carl, it doesn't sound like you're not as bothered as me, but yeah. So Carl, so what do you think to the whole plopping people in and out of time then?
It raises a lot of questions. For example, do they have the same memories? Do they, what's happened to them before this? If they were living their best life, would they have wound up on Red Dwarf in the first place? Because if Lister was living his best life, he wouldn't have got plastered in Liverpool and woke up on, I forgot what planet he wakes up on, but he wakes up on a bench with a passport in the name of Emily Birkenstein and all this. So he just, if he was presumably living his best life, none of this would be happening.
Well, he'd be dead, wouldn't he? He would have died 3 million years ago.
Yeah. And working with the logic of sci-fi time travel, if he was living his best life and he never went on Red Dwarf or anything like that, then that would change the situation. Like the cat wouldn't have existed; they never would have rescued Crichton, which we've established back in time slides, and Rimmer potentially would have maybe lived a better life as well. But it raises a lot of questions. For them to just go, we put a new Lister here, and he's going to replace the current one. it raises a lot in terms of like if we think too deeply about it, which we're probably
That's
doing
what
right
exactly
now.
what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It tears it to shreds.
And this Lister really does just seem like the same actor
Lister.
playing Lister. Sorry, this a different actor playing our Lister.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. I'll just say I think there is ways around it. You could just say that they haven't lived that life, that he can't change things in the time, and he just puts them into that position. But then you still have problems, because if someone's been changed in their life before that, from a different like planet or whatever, how does that have consequences with the world we live in, the butterfly effect, effectively? So yeah, from a science fiction point of view, it's a bit of a minefield, and you'd have to
also if someone's supposed to be replaced and then they're supposed to live their best life from that point. What if he finally gets around to someone and they're like 70?
Yeah,
somebody new's now taking your place and they're going to live your life to the best of their ability. It's like, well, how long's that?
Yeah, and it's established that he doesn't visit everyone at the same time. Like, I don't know, you could be 40 and 3 hours or whatever, because obviously all these characters were born at different times. Rimmer is perhaps a couple of years older than Lister, and Crichton is much, much younger than the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where does it end? Is the Inquisitor visiting babies and sort of going,
"Live your best life
by now"?
We are.
Can you imagine that?
We are just cutting this to pieces when we shouldn't. We do this, and
I know. I like that. I like the fact that can you imagine a baby who's failed to get to the crawling stage, or at least hanging off the side of the settee. Yeah. And no, you're 2 months late, mate. Let's change it.
There's the cold open. The Inquisitor removes a baby from existence just to really push forward the fact he's an absolute bastard.
I mean, he is an absolute bastard. You are not wrong. Yeah. Is anyone else really freaked out by the alternative Rimmer and Crichton being wrong?
The fact that the cat introduces himself as the cat seems weird. Because he's never really said his name before.
Good point.
It's sort of, I'm the cat. You almost think like he wouldn't go for that. He'd give himself a much cooler name than the cat.
Well, he's not the cat, really, is he? That's like me saying I am the human.
Yeah.
But it is the Edge. He is called the Edge.
Boo.
Maybe the cat means it in terms of out of all the cats, he is the cat.
Yeah,
that is true.
I am the cat. Yeah, you can work off that.
Yeah. The fact he calls him Rimmer, he said he calls Rimmer by his name is kind of strange. Yeah, well, it's like they're almost friendly.
Maybe in the reality where they didn't have our Crichton and our Lister, maybe it was Rimmer that he got close to. You don't know. Could be a different.
Maybe.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
As Mark would say. So the attack happens and the Inquisitor is shooting through the grates, which always frustrates me a little bit. He's running and shooting through grates on the floor through the studio or the place where they filmed. And eventually we find out that Lister's died, and the other Lister, our Lister, has seen that he could maybe use something in the future. Which he does.
Good gag. It's revolting, but it's such a good gag.
Just leading up to this is where the Rimmer and the cat are trying to ascertain who our Lister and Crichton are, and Rimmer talks about they probably want to rip our skin off and do funny things with it or something like that. It always amuses me how Rimmer's afraid of physical pain when he can't really have it done to him.
Well, hollow whips,
yeah, and shooting the light bee, but that's not till later this series. But yeah, it seems weird that they got, for the alternative Lister, they got someone who's actually recognizable from like, oh, I know him from telly, because they're only in it for what, a minute?
Yeah,
2 minutes?
that,
It's the guy from Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, it's you don't really see them. It's a weird edit how they get blown up, isn't it? It's sort of, they run onto a gantry and then it's like a jump cut almost and they're gone.
I think it might have actually been potentially too gory for a PG show.
There is an element, going back to what I was saying last week about this whole section of these 3 to 4 episodes of the season, because it's when the new director comes in, Juliet comes in, that Grant Naylor, as a director couple, came in and did some reshoots and some re-edits because they weren't happy with a lot of the stuff. So what I think's happened, especially over this one and the last one, it'll be interesting to see if there's much in Terraform, is there is some jump cuts, there is some stuff that's not really worked and not really pulled together, that they've had to either reshoot or they weren't happy with the original. So I think there might be an element of that in there as well.
I mean, it's not that Juliet May's a bad director either. She's gone on to direct a lot of stuff and a lot of sitcom stuff as well.
She just
directed all of Miranda.
Yeah. Well, they did say that it was early on in her career, and it's a sci-fi thing, so it's getting used to that. And what they were saying, what I've seen is that, you know, Ed Bye would go around with the whole, like, square the camera, we're saying where you are, and people were offset. Well, when you were in frame, Ed Bye would let you know you're in frame, and she wouldn't, because and it's more like even in rehearsals. So everyone would normally would know they're in frame and react as if they're on camera. And often when they were off camera, they weren't reacting. So when Juliet came in and did some directional stuff, they weren't aware they were on camera and they weren't reacting as if they were acting itself. So
I can imagine as an actor is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
Somebody may be doing like some really good work, and then you realize, well, one, they realize you're not reacting because you think you're off camera, and 2, you've kind of let the team down because you're not reacting because you didn't realize you're on camera.
Yeah, and I will stress that's not a criticism of her. I think it's the crew was so used to the existing framework and working together for the 4 years that this was a change, and they weren't ready for that change. She was a young director. She was doing something that's out of her understanding of some of the sci-fi. She wasn't a big sci-fi person. And there was a bit of like communication. So it was more like a communication issue with them all as well. So there was a lot of issues that they had at this point, which is really interesting in thinking that, as I say, this is like a peak of the seasons. But yeah, but talking about things that are edited out as well, is we do get the hand on the printer and don't recognize it, and then obviously he uses that thing. But there is the scene where Crichton never have existed anymore, which got deleted out, and it is in the Smeg-Ups. And it is because it's such a memorable Smeg-Up that you see it and you see the cut and it's jarring. I don't know if you saw that or realised that. It does feel really, really jarring.
I don't think it's one of the memorable Smeg-Ups for me. I do occasionally get a Smeg-Up memory when we've been doing these.
Yeah.
When do you want to do? We need to do the Smeg-Ups.
We do. Do you remember what the actual Smeg-Up was, though?
No.
So they're both standing together at that counter where he puts his hand up, and Crichton is saying, well, we never have ever existed here anymore, and there's a lot of that stuff going on. And then he gets handed the piece of paper to read that out, and the paper's in shot, and they have to take that off, and he goes, oh no, get rid of that. And then he then holds it in his hand. It pans across, and he puts his paper up, and you see the paper in his hand. And then there's a cut where Crichton actually does deliver the line, and it goes off. But when you watch the episode, it's not in at all.
I remember it now you've said it, yes.
It's a very thick line in terms of wordage. There's a lot going on in it. I can see why. I didn't notice, and I know that Smeg-Up quite well just from watching the videos a lot as a kid. But I didn't notice the line was cut. And I didn't notice, it didn't feel jarring to me that, we don't exist here anymore. And I can't, because it jumps straight to the gas, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It does.
Now you've said it, I remember that Smeg-Up. And it's weird, isn't it, that you don't spot that it wasn't in the Inquisitor. I've seen the Inquisitor so many times, and I've seen that Smeg up so many times, and I never clocked that it was cut.
It's a jarring cut. I mean, obviously, I think it's because I naturally look for cuts. So I think I'd seen it. I was like, oh, hang on. But as I say, you'll see it now, and I apologise if it's being a detriment to the episode, but you do feel it. So shooting through the gates. Where were we next? Oh yes, Crichton's leg shaking.
Oh,
so
funny and so sad at the same time. It's just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, the death holds no fear. It kind of, 'cause it takes you by surprise. It goes into that thing of this is a more dramatic episode in places, because you hear Crichton shout, "Have you got through them damn manacles yet?" It's, things are breaking down. This isn't your happy-go-lucky episode. This has got real stakes to it.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, with Lister smashing the hammer on the chain and them yelling at each other, it does build up tension. I mean, it is funny that Crichton says, like, "Oh, I have no fear of death," or anything like that. And it's kind of like the undercurrent of it. You're like, oh, right, okay.
This is probably the first time that I can think where Robert Llewellyn gets that kind of visual humour. Like in season 7, you get the whole bit, "Hold me back," and there's seasons in the Dave stuff where he's actually doing some like sort of really kind of overacting movements and, to play for laughs. And this is the first one I can think of where the whole aspect of that kind of, not overacting, but it's like using the leg shaking and his whole body's going, and it's used for that laugh. And I think it's probably the first time we've seen that. I can't think of anything before this.
Yeah, I think it could be the development of the suit.
Yeah.
Because this is probably, this and 6, I'd probably say not one of the best faces. I think is in 7. One of the best masks, 7 and 8. It's more rounded. It gives him more of like cheeks and stuff. But in terms of the suit, this is probably one of the more flexible ones he's got.
Yeah, but you think maybe in previous series he was restricted by the suit? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually.
Because he said before, like, he's not been able to sit down, or if he does sit down, there's been a sort of like clunk and they've had to screw him back into it and things like that. Maybe they've actually got to, because I know he gets to a point where it turns into, it's Velcro rather than screws.
Yeah.
So that might give him a lot more physicality to be able to do stuff.
Yeah, because in Whitehall he's sitting down, but obviously that was jump cuts. And this one he's in the seat, but he's actually able to move. And in the jump cut of Whitehall, he's very kind of still, isn't he? He's just kind of like sitting there, and talking.
He's there.
Yeah,
right.
It could definitely be the suit. Which, if it's the case, must have been quite frustrating for him, because he's always been a very physical sort of actor, and then being put in for any physical actor, being put in a very restrictive suit.
And again, with this whole story, and especially with Crichton and Lister gets to use his brains now, and Crichton gets to break his programming. And I think that really kind of condenses the episode. We're getting towards the end of the episode, and they are actually doing that. Lister gets youthed, and he gets aged. And I always think that when he gets aged, that the guy who he ages into looks a bit like the guy from Masters of the Universe.
Yeah.
Oh, shit, yeah.
I always got a bit confused that Craig Charles is mixed race, isn't he? Craig Charles is he's black.
Yeah.
But the older version of Lister
is white.
Is very much a Caucasian man.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing about this scene is when I was a youth and my voice hadn't broken, I didn't sound like I do now. And your voice does get more crackly as you get older as well. They just used Craig Charles's voice. Why didn't they get like an old Liverpudlian and a young Liverpudlian to do a voice for him?
time. I can imagine. I think it's quite funny hearing Craig Charles do that. He seems to slightly be trying it with the Smeg, you used me.
Yeah.
And he is kind of doing it a bit deeper when he's doing the older one. But whereas the young Lister looks fine, the older one is like, I haven't listened to the commentary tracks in a while, but I can imagine Craig Charles was probably looking at it going, doesn't look anything like me.
Yeah, there is a question mark on that. Definitely.
Maybe it's a crew member that they're just like, there's no one around, just you stand in and do it.
Come on, Dave, now's your chance.
Yeah.
Or a la Twin Peaks style.
I did look and see whether they credit the actors that play youth and old Lister, and they don't, because I wanted to look him up for the same reason you've just mentioned, to see if he's mixed race or not, the guy who played old Lister.
On Wikipedia, it's a guy called Carl Chase, but he's uncredited.
Yeah.
Let's have a look here. Oh, he's definitely white. Yeah. He's done some stuff. Yeah. According to this, he played old Lister, but before that, he was in Bottom, and he ended up being in stuff like Brookside. He's in The Mummy, Lara Croft.
Good grief.
Coronation Street for a long time, apparently, playing like loads of different roles. And he's in Alien 3 and Batman. So it's someone who's done some work.
Good grief.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, but for some reason he's just in an episode of Red Dwarf for a minute.
Yeah, not even that, is it really? So we have that gauntlet battle, something that we'll come back to in season 8. And then we also get, excuse me, can I just distract you for one brief second? Which I thought...
Everything about that scene, the campery of Crichton and the over kind of ridiculous, it pops me, that scene.
Yeah.
It just pops me. But
I also like just the way it's there, because it goes quite flat, but in a good way, because it goes like, in about it'll unfreeze in about 8 minutes. Today's been a bit of a bummer, hasn't it?
I love that line.
It's so understated. It's so understated.
While he's doing something, Crichton's just weighed it up.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a bummer today.
And then we get the finale. Obviously, as I say, Lister is using his brain. He's got this idea to hang him from the actual banister there, and he saves him, because then if he saves him, then he's able to like sort of be there, and he can't delete him. But then you've got the Inquisitor saying, well, if I delete you, then you won't be here there in the first place, which then completely redoes what we were saying before, because it's like, if another Lister was there, he'd probably just do the same. But yeah, because it goes to that fate and free will aspect of, do you have free will? If Lister was born, would he just do exactly the same? Even though it's different sperm. And then you've got the double, the double backfire, the fact that it was thought about all along, and it backfires on him. So there's quite a few bits to delve into with this, but I'll just take the first thing, that giving Lister an opportunity to potentially kill somebody from an audience perspective. What do you think to that, Mark?
You're right. He does kill the Inquisitor. He murders him. And that's the first time Lister's done that. But I think, all things considered, it's a bit of a would you kill Hitler? So, yeah. What it also kind of makes you realise is that when the Inquisitor is completely wiped from existence, it means that none of his replacements ever existed. And we're back to a world where none of his replacements ever existed. And it's a typical Red Dwarf wrap-up that wraps up so fucking much in like a minute and a half. And Red Dwarf has done this so many times before. Particularly a perfect example is Thanks for the Memory, for example, when it's got all these mysteries that are done in seconds. And I like it. It's clever, but not. It's kind of cheesy, but works because it's a sitcom. It's not heavy sci-fi. It's a sitcom. And it at least sort of kind of makes sense. Yeah, I still like it. I think it's classic Red Dwarf. Shit, we've got to wrap it up quickly now kind of ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was also talking about just, you're right, you've took my question slightly different to the way I intended it, but it works quite well as well. That I was saying from an audience point of view, when he's hanging him up on the rope, that it's out of character for Lister to do that until we find out what eventually happens. But then the finale part is something I didn't really think about. So the fact that you thought about it that way around is interesting to me, because I was thinking more of, you know, they've come up with this plan. They're going to kill, Lister's going to hang someone from like high up in the air and to drop him. And from an audience perspective, building that suspense is where the question I was asking there. But that's really interesting that you say about wiping the Inquisitor from existence. What do you think to it, Carl?
I think it's interesting. It's the building up of, you know, Lister's going to kill another person. You can almost have the Foot Clan argument of, you know, they're not human. And that's been established earlier on. They're a robot, which I think may be making it easier for the audience to accept that Lister's going to do it. Also, it shows he's kind of out of sorts because it's the return of Lister smoking.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he smoked since series 2 on screen. And it's a cigar as well to make him look kind of badass and tough. And
he had cigarettes in his pocket last episode, didn't he?
Yes, he did, but he doesn't. But I think in the 90s there was a big thing about lighting up on screen, wasn't there? Especially more kids that got into it. It's almost that thing of like Lister needs Inquisitor to think he's going to kill him, although Lister knows all the way through. But for us as fans, then yeah, it's going to be quite disturbing to see Lister. It's the way he phrases it before that scene starts, that you're not programmed to kill. Which kind of, if the plan was that Lister was never going to kill him, why would he say that to Crichton in the first place?
Yeah.
So there could be the thing of, you know, to erase the Inquisitor from existence, Lister was just going to kill him. But then obviously he comes up with the old backfiring time gauntlet trick, you know, that we all learned.
It's a nice way of getting round a cold-blooded murder. Had the Inquisitor not decided to murder him, he wouldn't have died. But it is still a preconceived killing of an entity. But again, there is he's not human, but they've also gone back and forth on the value of life, of mechanical life in Red Dwarf as well. The more I think about this, the more I realise they probably had an impossible job and they're just writing a fucking sitcom.
Yeah.
They've played willy-nilly with life and death before. I mean, you've got to look back to a few series ago. Was it Time Slides? Rimmer's alive at the end, and they need to get out of that really quickly. So he punches the exploding boxes that have never been there before, you know, and he kills himself. They've probably written themselves into a corner a bit, but I like how this wraps up. This is Crichton and Lister's plan, is to make the gauntlet backfire, which, you know, Crichton may have figured out. But in order to, you know, set up it's to lull the Inquisitor into the false sense of security almost.
And it's not necessarily, you could get around it by saying that he's just been deleted from the timeline, that he's somewhere. Because one of the questions I had originally, which I didn't bring up, is at the very beginning of the episode, he doesn't spend any time to talk to them. He just does it, doesn't he? He kind of has a brief conversation, does it, says, "There's your guy, bye." But with this one, he speaks to them for a while and he says, "Right, well, now I'm going to delete you out of the timeline. But I delete you from existence." So, you know, had it been Star Trek, they would have done something with the gauntlet, wouldn't they? They said that and it probably might not have actually, justice would have been served, but it wouldn't have gone that far. But it is interesting. It is interesting, Mark, because I didn't think of it that way. But you're right.
It's weirdly convoluted when you think about it. He is ultimately going to ensure the death of the Inquisitor. So why didn't he just chop his head off when he was frozen in time? Because,
well, if he chopped his head off, he'd just be dead.
I suppose Lister's thinking that if he erases him from time, it resets everything, doesn't it? It resets everyone that's ever been.
Okay, good point. Well made. Okay, I'll take that.
I almost think that Lister's not thinking that deep in that it undoes everything that's ever been done, just that it'll undo what's happened to them.
Yeah.
And he'll get, Rimmer and the cat back and everything will be as it was, earlier that day. I think for them, it's almost because they are 3 million years into deep space. The preservation of themselves is probably the number one thing because there isn't anybody else as far as they're aware. And everybody else that they do meet normally tries to kill them. So if I think with them, with erasing him, there's that thing of everything we've done is back to normal. And then there's the additional bonus of, and everything you've done to everyone else is going to be undone as well.
Which has
of course, he could have, one of the replacements could have cured cancer or something like that, and that's been completely undone.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. And I think what it implies is that none of the erasures ever happened, and they were living in the world where none of them had happened already. And this was always an inevitability because the Inquisitor never existed. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
It's the whole what happened situation, isn't it? It was always going to happen, and then it asks you the question of free will and fate.
Yeah, didn't think of any of this shit when I was a kid. It was all about the moral judgments and the shooty, the exciting, the old the old Lister, and just a really fun episode with some superb gags that makes me howl to this day.
Yeah. So today wasn't so much a bummer, was it? It was a good day.
It was a good day.
With the way it ends, though, they should still have the gauntlet somewhere. Because the gauntlet's left. Oh, no, the gauntlet does disappear, doesn't it, when the Inquisitor disappears?
The Inquisitor created the gauntlet, therefore the gauntlet never existed, so it disappeared moments after the Inquisitor was taken out of existence.
It was a good effect. I like the effect. It was obviously very early 90s, but it was a good effect to have for removing someone from existence.
It was. And that brings us to the end of the episode. So, any final thoughts, gents, before we call it a day?
One small thing. That costume was fucking great. The Inquisitor's helmet is brilliant. Like, so brilliant. Just, love the costume.
Yeah, I think it is something we've not really mentioned is Jack Doherty's performance as the Inquisitor is really good. And considering he said in interviews that he was going to do it completely differently, which apparently he was going to do it quite camp. Yeah, it's on one of the documentaries. He said the voice was going to be like, "I'm going to expunge people from existence."
Oh, shit, a brick. No.
Yeah, and I think that was the reaction of, I think he said Craig Charles hit him, told him not to do it that way. And that's when he came out with the voice. But it's a very good choice. A lot of the actors you get doing the robots and simulants, like you got Gordon Kennedy last couple of series ago doing Hudson. They always do. They get the voice right for a baddie, definitely.
So that brings us to the end then. So without further ado, as we do every single week, Carl, where can people find you on that there internet?
People can find what I'm up to, podcasts and film nights and the like, at allmylinks.com, and it's /Mr. Carl.
Okay, Mark.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MarkAdamsHC. I have 3 other podcasts, one about tattoos at Ink Stories Pod on Twitter and Instagram, one about kids TV at RITC Pod on Twitter, that's Right in the Childhood, and one based on my job as a humanist celebrant at Life's Milestones on Twitter, that's called Life's Milestones.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake, that's RMULDRAKE. Find me over on the Xcast, which is the X-Files podcast, on Twitter at the X_cast. And Make It So, the Star Trek Picard podcast. And that you can find that at Jean-Luc Podard. So those are the best places to find me. Carl, you will be leaving us for this season. You may well appear on specials or definitely season 6. So
definitely, I think I'm on the first 2 episodes of season 6. I think we're on the run now where I'm Mr. Episode 1 and 2.
Nice. Who does this schedule? I wonder. So thanks very much. As I say, I don't know what the specials are. We don't know either, to be honest with you.
We've
for
got
season 5, season 6, but we'll see.
We'll find
so
out.
You may pop up.
There's lots of fun stuff to do. Did you want to do Pink Dwarf?
I've talked to you about Pink Dwarf before. Then we'll leave it at that. But thank you very much as always. I will see you next season. But until next time, remember everyone.
I'm a pleasure to the world because I have such a beautiful ass.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming. Elsewhere on We Made This. The time is now. A Millennium podcast.
But no, I mean, I will say that Rise of the Machines also kind of like argues against
Terminator 2, of course.
Back to where it was.
Like Rise of the Machines, like then goes, maybe they're both right, and shrugs its shoulders. It's like, maybe you can prevent Judgment Day, but only for a little while. And it's like, that's not an argument. Pick a side, pick a lane. You can either change the past or you can't. None of this wishy-washy. You can change it sometimes, but you can't really change it. So it all balances out. Yeah, no, pick a damn side.
Frame to frame.
So what Hitchcock said about the film was that Bernard Herrmann's score was 33% of the effect of the film. So as a result of that, he doubled his salary, which I don't know how he worked those maths out, but hey.
Exactly, yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the score?
I mean, it's one of the greatest scores ever composed for a film, and it's a fantastic example of misdirection, because you think that the jabbing, though it was written for a string-only orchestra, which is very unorthodox, because you think for a standard symphonic approach in a film score will mix tonalities from different host of instruments, strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion. This strips out everything except the strings, and the amount of emotional range that Bernard Herrmann is able to get out of it is really extraordinary.
Free with this month's issue.
You know what actually ruined it for them? That f***ing bass player with his stupid face.
Yes,
pulling his
absolutely.
stupid faces. Also, that weird, shaved-in parting that the singer had. Also,
if people knew a third song by Alien Ant Farm, this would have been it, because this was on Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3.
that would be it. I know it from this CD and that, because I remember when one or the other happened, that the other had happened previously.
Yeah.
Good sentence, Ian. Well done. He's got a good voice. That's the thing. He definitely likes Incubus.
Yeah. Glassjaw is
also that, yeah.
Actually, even more so, Head Automatica. He's basically, if somebody ordered Daryl Palumbo, but
from Wish,
but wanted extra annoyingness, then this is what they'd get.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.